Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Shifting Gears Podcast. I am your host, Justin LaRoque. I am the marketing manager here at Spectrum Automotive Holdings, and this podcast is presented by Spectrum Automotive Holdings. And of course, if you're new to the podcast, well, first of all, appreciate you taking some time to listen to us here today. And if you're not familiar with it, the podcast itself is all about the automotive industry. We focus on anything and everything that deals with, the dealership life. Whether you work in and around a dealership or for a dealership or you're partnered with a dealership, I think that you can always find something valuable here on this podcast. I know in the past we've talked a lot about careers in automotive. I've had guests talk about reinsurance, F&I profits, women in automotive, dealerships, recruitment in today's world. We've had a lot of different discussions, and one thing I always like to clarify is that I am not in any way the expert when it comes to this automotive discussion, but this is why I bring on my guests, because they are the experts in this field. So I'm really excited for today's guest because it's his first time here on the podcast, and I'm sure it'll be the first of many more to come. But I am talking about the president of F&I Guys, who are based out in New Hampshire. Talking about my good friend Jason Gannon. Jason, how's it going, man?
Hey, not too bad, Justin. I appreciate you having me on today.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate you taking some time to be here, and excited to have you on. I know we've been planning this out for a little while. Before we get into the topic and the questions and everything else, why don't you just tell the people listening just a little bit about F&I Guys? Who you are, where you're based out of, and how long you've been with the company.
So F&I Guys is a training and development agency. We also do reinsurance products, mostly in the New England market. And we started about a decade ago. And Mark Jagier was the founder and kind of went on his own as an independent agent. And I came on with them a few years later, and we've been kind of building since then in the New England area, trying to just grow. And one of the things we specialize in is training F&I managers that don't have experience and putting them through kind of a university that prepares them for the job. And we found that we've gotten better success with that. So that's kind of like our niche. But we also do a plethora of other things as well.
Love it. I love it. Absolutely. That's great. And for those listening right now, and again, I do appreciate you taking some time here, Jason. For those listening now, the topic that we're talking about today is ways dealerships can prepare for when inventory returns. Now, I know that this has been obviously a very big subject matter within the industry for the past couple of years. And Jason, I guess we can jump right into this. I wanted to ask you, tell us a little bit about the inventory shortages in general. What's been happening since the pandemic came here in 2020, and how's it been different since then?
I mean, it's, business was booming right before the pandemic. I mean, things were just, at all-time highs as far as volume goes. But then with, shutdowns internationally, and just, it's not just the virus or, pandemic reasons. There's been other things. I mean, there was a ship that was carrying, several hundred vehicles that got stuck at sea, and then other shutdown reasons for different plants all across the world. And it all kind of goes back to the chip shortages that we're mostly all familiar with. You need these microchips in order to make these vehicles work. And unlike a cell phone that runs on like maybe one or two, cars have, 40 or 50 of them. So they are needed for the, just the features that, we're used to in the vehicles. So without those, it's made it so, getting cars is not like it used to be before. You would have hundreds of cars on the lot, and you'd have to have a certain amount of inventory for how many cars you sell, and you prepare for that. And now, ever since this has happened, it's, people are doing pre-orders. The cars are sold mostly before the vehicle even gets there. And the dealers are really fighting hard to get that allocation. Whereas before it was like they were turning away cars. Now they're trying to get whatever cars they can.
Wow. So yeah, that is definitely, I don't get much time to spend in dealerships, but that sounds pretty crazy to think about, and how dramatic it's changed, obviously, with the pandemic and everything. It sounds like there's, would you say that there's a leverage that dealerships have right now? Like what does that look like ever since this inventory shortage?
Well, that's the crazy thing. It's like, before, it was a race to the bottom price to be able to acquire new buyers. You were trying to advertise and undercut your competitors constantly. And it has really shifted now that there's no vehicles and the demand is still there. And some of that had to do with, the stimulus money that was out there, and people had some extra money to spend. And in America, we love to buy cars. So they're out there trying to buy vehicles. And what was happening is now you have all this demand, but you don't have the supply to match it. So dealers went from a position where, customers would shop them all over the internet, different places, to now it's who has the car at the right time and has the right buyer, which has given a huge benefit as far as profit margins to dealers, because now they don't need to undercut to sell. They're in a position where they can sell for full retail, and sometimes even over that. And not to mention, in addition, with not having dealers pay what's called a floor plan, which is essentially interest to have the inventory that they need to sell cars. So they're paying a premium to keep those vehicles in stock. And when there's no vehicles to keep in stock, they're not having to pay that premium anymore. So they're also benefiting from that as well.
Oh wow, yeah, I didn't even think of that. That's definitely, it's an interesting thing to kind of consider here as we've shifted gears. And I mean, so even with like the staff, like what does this mean for the staff? Is there an advantage for them in this current this situation right now?
Again, it is crazy how much it's changed, because we were in a position. I mean, one of the things we do as an agency is we place talent. And as I said before, we like to train from within, but sometimes you have to put an ad out. And before, you would put an ad out and there were plenty of spots to fill. Like, I always had a place to put people. But with inventory down, what's happening is that the volume is down. So dealers that were selling 150 cars are now selling 100 cars. And the dealerships themselves are doing okay profit wise, because they're making more per unit than they were, and they're saving on those other things like I mentioned with the floor plan and other items like that. But what that means is that there's no longer a demand to fill positions, because you can essentially take your all-star team of your staff, and that's who you keep. And they either laid off, or the people that could not produce, because most auto dealerships pay on performance. If there's no volume and they're not making money, they go and they'll do something else. So who has remained has been the strongest performers. So you're finding that most dealerships are loaded with talent, and people aren't moving as much as they were. I mean, the turnover has drastically slowed down over the last few years. And it's just because, it's a tough job market right now. If you're looking for a position, it's not like it used to be where you could just find a place eventually. You're going to be looking for some time, because everybody's got key players in each of those key positions.
Right, it's like everybody's loaded up already. They don't need necessarily a lot of newer folks coming in. Yeah, that's interesting. We recently had our last guest a couple of episodes ago, Mike Nagast, who had talked to us about recruitment, and he kind of brought some of that up as well. So really interesting. I guess my other question is, what challenges do you foresee when dealerships no longer have this leverage? I mean, eventually things are going to change, right? I assume that, the inventory shortage is not going to be what it was these past 2 years eventually, right? So what happens then?
Well, like they say, nothing lasts forever. So
Yeah.
right now, everything's great, which is crazy, because, you did not think when COVID first hit, there was a panic in the industry. There were dealers that weren't just stopped buying cars. They were just panicking because we didn't know what the future was going to be. And then when it became apparent that we could survive this, and we kind of adapted to it, now we're enjoying the benefits and seeing record profits year over year. But eventually that demand is going to slow down, as there's less stimulus money out there for people to have disposable income to spend on cars. And especially with inflation right now and the price of everything that you do in life going up, what's going to happen is that demand is going to slow down. And what I think dealers need to be really prepared for is, okay, once we don't have the leverage anymore of, okay, we have the car that you want, it's here, it's in stock, nobody else has it. So if you want it, you're going to pay for it. When you don't have that anymore, and the consumer's like, oh, well, I'll just wait because I can't pay that price right now. We're going to have to shift into being able to sell again, because right now there's not much salesmanship going on the floor. It's pretty much order taking. They come in, here's the car, that's the car you want, here's the price, it is what it is. If you don't want it, someone else buys it. There's not the negotiating techniques and the typical training and salesmanship that we've been training on for years is kind of it's when it's easy, people are going to take the path of least resistance. So the
Right.
challenge is going to be, once that's over, how the dealerships, the good dealers, are going to be the ones that can adapt and get their people back into that, strong form of selling to be able to keep the margins and the volume up where it needs to be.
Man, it's really weird to hear you say like the negotiation, portion of this is kind of out the window at the moment. Uh, the typical dealership and customers going in, negotiating, obviously being at the forefront of that for the longest time. So yeah, it just feels weird to hear that.
I mean, I've been in the auto industry, Justin, for a couple decades now, and I've just never seen anything like it. It's never been, when I started out, the internet was just becoming more prominent, and we found that, okay, that leverage that we used to have, where we knew what invoice was, and it that information wasn't readily available, and the margins were higher because of that. We went through that phase of, okay, that changed, and then ever since then, it's never been like this. This is definitely, I think this will be a time, a few decades from now, that we'll look back on and be like, wow, remember that time when, people would just come in and just pay whatever, and pay over sticker price for
Right.
a vehicle that they would have wanted to buy at, under invoice before.
Yeah, that's that's wild. I'm sure we will be looking back at that. So, with all this being said, like what could dealerships do right now, or what should they be considering? I guess I should say, in terms of kind of preparing with all this.
So one thing that we've seen a lot of, with the, again, you've got, in the auto dealership world, you have, like with anything, you have different levels of performance, right? You have your high performing dealers, and then you have your sleepier dealers that kind of just, they're just not as aggressive, as the top dealers. But what the top dealers are doing is they're realizing is that right now you have a choice because of the market. A lot of dealers are able to do what are called market adjustments, which essentially is saying, okay, this car was $50,000, but because it's in such high demand and there's not enough of them, we're going to charge you $10,000 over that to buy this vehicle. That would have been, remember, if anyone paid MSRP a couple of years ago, it was like, wow, you paid a lot. Now it's consistently happening where there are customers paying $5, $10, $15,000 over MSRP. The problem with that is that doing it that way, it's kind of like when you had the bailouts. Ford didn't take any bailout money, and GM did, and there was residual effects from that because people remembered, yep, you let the government bail you out, and Ford did not, and that bought them some brand credibility. And it's the same thing with dealerships now. It's like the dealers that are charging over sticker, the customers are going to remember that, yeah, when you had the advantage, you kept it over me. So when it shifts back, they're gonna think the opposite. So what the smarter dealers are doing, rather than just up the price of the vehicle, they're including a benefit along with that. So there's some safety items out there. There's a program called Pulse, which is essentially like a third brake light that drastically decreases rear end collisions. And some dealers are basically installing that on the vehicles and charging an addendum price for that, just like when you buy a vehicle and it's got a comfort package or it's got a special equipment package. There's an upcharge for that, so the consumer is actually getting something in return.
Right.
So I've seen dealers that are doing maintenance plans that are working into it to keep the consumer coming back to them. But what that's going to do is that the consumer is then going to get conditioned and understand, okay, if they see a benefit and you can test it right now when people are going to be very open to it. And then what's going to happen is once that goes away, the consumer is going to be used to that product, whatever that is. And if you choose the right value add, you'll be able to hold that extra profit and gross post when the inventory comes back.
Oh wow. Okay. Yeah, I mean that's a interesting way to look at it, as you're mentioning, like kind of tacking on certain things. Whereas otherwise, if you're just upping the price, these customers are not going to forget that, right?
No, I mean,
So
would you?
no, no, absolutely not. That'll be on my notes for sure on my next time shopping around. So yeah, interesting kind of angle to go at it, and different things to consider. So my next question is, what does $124,000 medium income of new car buyers say about the market? How does that impact preload products?
I just heard this stat, a few weeks ago, and I was pretty shocked by it. $124,000 is the median income of a new car buyer. When you think of what the average income was a few years ago of just, the average person. So what that means is that the new car buyer that's out there, kind of like with the housing market, one of the things with the housing market is, everyone's talking about, how that market could collapse. But one of the crazy things is that although houses are being sold at a premium and for way more than they used to, the buyers are coming to the table with a lot of money. So the loans aren't as bad. And it's the same thing in the auto business. What's happening is that the demand for new cars is a more affluent customer and, a more financially stable customer, which is good. The flip side of that, though, is that also, I think, tells us that the lower to mid-level income buyer is kind of disappearing, meaning with the stress of inflation and everything else that's going on, they're not buying as many new cars. They've kind of given up on the new car market and are either going to buy used or, which what we don't want in the auto industry is choosing to fix the vehicle that they have. So I think that $124,000 number is just shocking to me because, working at a dealership, in F&I for all the years that I did, I remember looking at what the average income was on a credit app, and that's high.
So we're hearing dealers talk about thinning their used car inventory. Why is that talk happening with the state of the new car inventories right now?
Well, you've got it kind of links back to that same issue of that middle to low income buyer disappearing from the marketplace because that's who is going to buy, that's who is typically buying the used vehicles out there. So, we've got a couple of dealers that primarily focus on that market and they're having a shift right now because it's just harder and harder to get those, subprime buyers and, lower income buyers in because again, there's just with the stress of the economy right now and just things that are going on outside of the auto business that are affecting people's financial lives, it's reflecting on the used car market. And I believe the dealers are just, seeing that and being proactive.
All right, Jason. So one last question for you before we kind of wrap things up here. Pre-pandemic, there was a lot of talk of F&I departments being obsolete. Do you feel that the thought process is still in place after the strength of F&I revenues fueled dealers' pandemic profit surge?
It's funny because I don't perceive to know the right answer to every question, but with that, I've always been shocked because F&I was the last part. I mean, again, as I spoke about before with, the advent of the internet and, how powerful the online research capabilities are for consumers, what that has done is made it so pre-pandemic, you didn't have any leverage on the front end because, the consumer had so much information they had access to. F&I was one of the last places in the dealership that could produce profit. And in a lot of dealerships was carrying them pre-pandemic. Now, going into the pandemic and inventory shortages, we have seen F&I PVRs increase. And I think a lot of that has to do with just, when you're living through a pandemic or an extreme situation, it makes you think twice about protecting your investment because before it's like, oh, that's never going to happen to me. And then who would ever thought that, we'd be sitting in a living in a world where, for a few months, even dealerships were completely closed. You know what I mean? So
Right.
dealers the consumer kind of woke up to the fact like, okay, maybe I need to think about, what could possibly happen. So you've seen F&I gross increase. You've seen front end gross increase. This idea of taking F&I department completely out of it, I have never been a fan on. I just think that the F&I itself is just there's so much to it. You ask, you see the average salesperson look at an finance manager and be like, oh yeah, I just want to do that job until they actually do it. And they realize like how much you need to know and, how many things you need to master and to be able to communicate to a consumer, how much technology is in the vehicle that they're purchasing. So, I don't envision the F&I department becoming obsolete. And I think that going through this and seeing, how the profit potential that's there and seeing the numbers that are achievable, I think that is at the very least going to put a pause to that thought process, if not eliminate. But, hey, there's going to be some dealers that are going to try it and, maybe have a model where salespeople are presenting everything or, kind of like a one price fits all type thing. And that's their decision. Would I do it? No.
Right.
I mean, it gets harder every year too. Like it's like there's always a new regulation, or there's something else. Right now, the big thing is safeguarding consumers' information. Like we think about in dealerships, making sure that we don't have licenses laying around or things like that. But now it's getting into, okay, if you send an email with a customer's information in it, there are situations where that information gets captured by a hacker or whatever, whoever's trying to get it, and then you have a breach of privacy there. So it's like, when you just think of all the different avenues, from the compliance to the product knowledge that's needed to talk about these products, and then to just you have to have knowledge of how each state works as far as titling, and it is too intricate of a job, in my opinion, to leave it to someone that's doing that job and other things. It really, in my opinion, needs to be a sole focus of one person or one department in a dealership.
Great insight there, Jason, and really that's all I have for you today in terms of questions. Before we wrap up, again, we're talking about ways dealerships can prepare for when inventory returns. Is there anything that you wanted to add before we close out here?
No, I think and that pretty much sums it up. I know that a lot of the other agents out there or dealer principals are experiencing these same things. And like I said, I don't have all the right answers, but this is kind of what I have seen that's out there with some of the better operators that I know. And, I'd be open. I'm on LinkedIn all the time. So if anyone has any other opinions or possible solutions to some of the issues we talked about, I'd be certainly open to hearing them, and excited to learn something.
Absolutely, man, and well said there. And again, just appreciate your time. I've certainly learned a lot just having you here today and hearing a lot of the different topics that you've kind of covered here. So again, appreciate your insight on that, and I hope the listeners do as well. So yeah, I definitely love to have you back at some point. I know there's plenty of other hot topics within this automotive industry that we're in, so would love to pick your brain some more, and maybe we'll cover something in the near future.
Yeah, there's no shortage of in this current market in the industry. There's definitely going to be no shortage of things to discuss. There's a lot of challenges coming our way, and it's going to be up to the folks that can adapt and overcome are going to be the ones that succeed, because there's going to be a lot of curveballs coming up in the next few years that we're going to have to prepare for.
Well said, Jason. Well said. And again, thank you so much for your time and for being here as a guest here on the Shifting Gears podcast. And look forward to having you on again soon.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
All right. Take care. And there you have it, folks. Another great episode of Shifting Gears podcast wrapped up. Big thanks again to Jason Gannon and the guys over at F&I Guys. Really appreciate having Jason on, and I hope that you all here listening right now enjoyed that. Again, if you are trying to get in touch with Jason, you can just find him over on LinkedIn, as he mentioned, or I'll also make sure to put his information in the description below here if you want to reach out directly to him as well. And of course, if you're trying to get in touch with me, you can find me over on LinkedIn also. Don't be afraid to reach out and say hello. Definitely we'll have more of these episodes in the near future. So until next time, just a reminder, we are on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, and even YouTube. So make sure you are subbed up and subscribed to all of our Spectrum Automotive Holdings platforms. And until next time, we will catch you on the next episode.